The Mets' 3-game winning streak at the end of August continued all the way through September 7th. That's 9 games, 9 straight wins that could not have come at a better time. As of September 7th now, the Mets have eclipsed the Atlanta Braves and hold the 3rd wildcard spot with a 1-game lead. Something happened, though. Something happened in that September 7th game against the Cincinnati Reds. It's the 4th inning. Jeff McNeil is up to bat. He's still been, by far, the Mets' hottest hitter in the second half. He comes up to bat against Brandon Williamson.
And he's trying to bunt, but he gets out of the way and hits him right on the top of the wrist.
And now Bader batting for McNeil, who got hit.
An MRI on the morning of the 8th reveals that McNeil has a wrist fracture. He's going to miss the entire rest of the season. With as good as he's been recently, this is a huge blow that could not have come at a worse time. The Mets lose to the Reds 1-3. The Mets' injury woes continue just a few days later. On September 13th, we learned that Dedniel Nunez is also going to miss the entire rest of the season. He went on the IL from the end of July through the end of August with a right pronator strain, came back for a game on the 24th, and then went back on the IL afterwards. After a PRP injection, we can now be sure that he's done for the year. The Mets go 3-2 over this stretch. On September 18th, we learn that Christian Scott is also done for the year and is scheduled to undergo Tommy John surgery. Scott had 5 great starts for the Mets in their horrible month of May, but was ultimately sent back down to AAA so the Mets could optimize their roster with the extra days off coming up for the London series. He was brought back up in July, but hit the IL with a sprained UCL. He was given 2 months of rest and rehab before it was ultimately decided surgery was necessary. The Mets go 3-2 over this stretch as well. On September 18th, the Mets have the 2nd wildcard spot. Their record is tied with Arizona, and they are 2 games ahead of the Braves. Next on the schedule is the first place Philadelphia Phillies. But we have other things to discuss. After all, this is the 2nd game of our Episode 5 doubleheader. We're here to talk about more Mets controversies. And in this series, we've kind of reached a fun point where I get to now start talking about a lot of the things I told you in earlier episodes that we would talk about later, like Matt Harvey's escapades in part 1 of this episode, which I had alluded to before. Here's another couple of stories about a guy I alluded to before, way back in episode 2 actually. We gotta go back to the early 90s now. This is Vince Coleman. The Mets acquired Vince Coleman in the offseason before 1990. A switch-hitting, speedy outfielder, Coleman had 3 consecutive seasons of 100 or more stolen bases with the St. Louis Cardinals. He is still, to this day, and likely for a long time to come, the last player to ever steal 100 bases in a season. Vince Coleman was also a nutcase. He had constantly got into heated arguments with his coaches and managers, Mike Cubbage and Bud Harrelson in 1991 and Jeff Torberg in 1992, and he didn't have a great relationship with the New York media. But that's just the beginning. In April of 1992, Vince Coleman was one of 3 Mets named in a sexual assault case. He, Dwight Gooden, and Darryl Boston were accused of repeatedly raping a woman in a rented house in Port St. Lucie, Florida, after Gooden brought her there from a nightclub near Jupiter. This all had allegedly happened a year prior, in the early hours of March 30th, 1991. The case was ultimately dropped due to a lack of evidence. The only piece of evidence given was a semen-stained dress, in which tests indicated a high likelihood that the semen came from Gooden. Coleman and Boston could not be linked to the scene. Coleman wasn't done being the center of controversy, though. In April 1993, Coleman was recklessly swinging a golf club around in the clubhouse when he accidentally struck Dwight Gooden on his right shoulder, his throwing arm. Fortunately, Gooden was not seriously hurt, but he did skip a scheduled start before pitching the next day. Now, just 3 months later, almost exactly to the day, in July 1993, Vince Coleman and our old friend Bobby Bonilla were hanging out with Dodgers left fielder Eric Davis after a game in Los Angeles. The three were in Davis's car in the Dodgers parking lot when Coleman leaned out the window and threw an M80 firecracker into a crowd of people. M80s are not just regular firecrackers. This is the type of shit that can blow your hand off. In the aftermath, Coleman injured a 33-year-old woman, an 11-year-old boy, and a 1-year-old girl. The little girl had second-degree burns on her face as well as finger and eye injuries. The boy had an abrasion on his leg, and the woman suffered an aggravated previous ear injury. Coleman originally faced up to 3 years in prison, but with the help of lawyer Robert Shapiro, who represented O.J. Simpson, he pled guilty and got his charges dropped to misdemeanors with 3 years probation and 200 hours of community service. All 3 victims' families sued Coleman as well. When Coleman was first charged with the felony, about a month after the incident occurred, the Mets immediately released him, and thus was the end of the Vince Coleman saga. But Coleman wasn't the only Met in the middle of some questionable situations that year, or that month, or that week. It's July 27th, just 3 days after Vince Coleman threw an M80 at those poor people. Reporters in the Mets clubhouse are trying to speak to Dwight Gooden, when no one knows what it is at first, but some kind of liquid comes raining down on the media. Water? Maybe, but with these Mets it seems more likely that it'd be piss. It's not, but the smell and the destructive aftermath soon make it clear. It's bleach. It gets 2 reporters real bad, Dave D'Alessandro of The Record and Mark Herman of Newsday. Their clothes are effectively ruined. And no one knows who's done it. The Mets undergo an internal investigation to find the culprit. It takes about a week and a half, done by Friday, August 6th. That day, the Mets reveal to the media that they know who the culprit is, but they don't say who. The 28-year-old 2-time Cy Young winner and 1985 World Series MVP, Mets pitcher Brett Saberhagen, is seen later that day throwing a temper tantrum in the Mets clubhouse laundry room, allegedly destroying a hamper with a baseball bat. On Tuesday, August 10th, Saberhagen confesses to the media. It was him. He loaded a super soaker with bleach and sprayed it into the air. He didn't mean to, apparently. He was just trying to spray down a Mets employee as a prank when he pulled the trigger too hard. Still, he publicly apologizes and donates 1 full day's pay, $15,384, to the Eye Research Foundation, a charity chosen for him by the Baseball Writers Association of America. That incident came on the same day that Saberhagen had confessed about his role in another incident about 3 weeks earlier. On July 7th, he, not unlike his teammate later in the month, tossed lit firecrackers at a group of reporters at Shea Stadium. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but it seems we now know where Vince Coleman got his bright idea from. What is it with these Mets and firecrackers? Another Mets pitcher was often at the center of controversy in the early 90s. We've talked a great deal about him already in multiple episodes. It's David Cone. In September of 1991, 3 women sued David Cone for making death threats against them at a Mets game one day. The lawsuit was for $8.1 million. Cone claimed that the women were harassing his teammate Sid Fernandez's wife, Nalani. Apparently, one of the women had previously had a relationship with Fernandez. Cone blew up at them in her defense, but maintained that he never threatened their lives. The lawsuit lingered on in court for 3 weeks, until another bomb dropped. In early October, David Cone was named in a rape investigation in Philadelphia. He was accused of raping an unnamed 24-year-old woman from New Jersey, who claimed that the incident happened at the Hilton Towers Hotel on Saturday, October 5th at 6 p.m. She filed a police report the next morning. Cone cooperated fully with the Philadelphia Police Department, and ultimately the case was dropped. The alleged victim's claims were found to be without merit. Her stories were inconsistent, and the witnesses' accounts failed to corroborate anything she said. And that was that. That was that until another 2 weeks or so later, when the three women of the previous lawsuit amended their lawsuit to include that, during a game in 1989, Cohn apparently lured two of them down to the bullpen, where he proceeded to masturbate in front of them. Cohn, of course, denied these accusations as well. He stated that he, as a starting pitcher, never had any reason to ever even be in the bullpen. All the charges were eventually dropped, although Cohn did settle an undisclosed amount of money with one of the women, on the basis that he called her a groupie. Still, during the course of the 1992 season, opposing teams' fans would taunt Cohn by mimicking a certain self-pleasuring movement whenever he was on the mound. Whether these incidents happened or not, this type of PR is obviously never a good look for the organization. And it was a horrible look for Cohn too, of course. He was harassed by the New York media for months on end. No one really talks about this stuff with Cohn now. He's currently a broadcaster for the Yankees. We're going to skip ahead a couple of years now and talk about this switch-hitting outfielder who played for the Mets from 1994 to 1997. His name is Carl Everett. It's August 6th, 1997. At Shea Stadium, there's a private playroom meant for the children of Mets players to occupy themselves during the game. The Mets are hosting the Colorado Rockies. Carl Everett's 4-year-old son, also named Carl, and 5-year-old daughter Shauna are dropped off in the playroom before the game. I don't know if Everett's wife Linda dropped them off, or perhaps another relative or a nanny, but regardless, the two children are dropped off. A child care worker employed by the Mets notices something wrong. Shauna has massive bruises and welts all up and down her arms and on her face. The child care worker called the police, and the situation was deemed serious enough that Child Protective Services came and took the children to a nearby hospital. An investigation into Carl and Linda Everett ensued. The two children were to be placed in foster care until the court hearing. Over the course of the case, it was revealed that both Linda and Carl Everett regularly used belts and other forms of corporal punishment to discipline their children. There was an incident in which Linda had beaten Carl with a handbag, and another where Carl, the father, beat both his kids for ordering a movie on TV when he told them not to. Shauna herself even alleged she'd go hungry from having food withheld from her. It was as clear-cut a case of child abuse as you could possibly have. The two children remained in foster care for months. A settlement was eventually reached in which Carl and Linda Everett could retain custody of their children if they attended therapy sessions and parenting classes. They did, and successfully reunited with their son Carl in 1998. Shauna, who had sustained the majority of the abuse, was sent to live with her grandmother in Florida until it was deemed safe for her to return to her parents. It's not clear if that ever happened, but considering that they continued to attend therapy and parenting classes, I assume it eventually did. Carl Everett was constantly in the headlines throughout his career for other quotes and incidents, but this complete mess was certainly the worst of it. And of course, it had to be during his brief stint with the Mets. Just 1 year later, the Mets front office would find themselves in the middle of even more controversy. On November 8th, 1998, Mets GM Steve Phillips took a leave of absence from the team because he was facing a sexual harassment lawsuit. The woman was an employee of the Mets at their Port St. Lucie spring training complex, though it's not clear when the alleged harassment occurred. Before taking his leave of absence, Phillips publicly denied the allegations, but admitted to having consensual sex with that woman, amongst others. He had a wife. The suit was eventually settled outside of court for an undisclosed sum. Mets owners Fred Wilpon and Nelson Doubleday Jr. didn't initially know how long Phillips' leave of absence would be for. Phillips had just done a spectacular job, in their eyes, in negotiating a contract extension with the newly acquired Mike Piazza, so they refused to let him go. In the interim period, they hired former Mets GM Frank Cashin, who was responsible for building the 1986 World Series roster, to fill in. 2 days after Phillips' leave of absence, It was Cashin who signed Bobby Bonilla to his infamous second Mets deal. Phillips returned to the team 6 days later. Almost 10 years later, Phillips found himself at the center of even more controversy. He was fired by the Mets in 2003 and shortly thereafter became an analyst on ESPN. In October 2009, Steve Phillips admitted to a brief consensual sexual relationship with an ESPN production assistant named Brooke Hundley. Phillips ended the relationship, but apparently Hundley became obsessive and started harassing Phillips' wife, Marnie, over the phone. Marnie Phillips, the mother of Steve Phillips' 4 sons, filed for divorce. Steve Phillips admitted to sex addiction and sought rehab for his problems. He was later fired by ESPN for the incident. We're going to move on now to 2002. Now, back in the early 2000s, the world didn't have the generally lax view of marijuana as it does today. Before 2019, weed was considered a banned substance by MLB, and those caught using it via drug test were subject to disciplinary action. So in 2002, it was a huge deal when several Mets players were confirmed to have used recreational pot. This story involves 3 Mets in particular: outfielder Tony Tarasco and relief pitchers Mark Corey and Grant Roberts. It starts with Tarasco and Corey. June 26th. The Mets just lost to the Braves 6-3. Tony Tarasco and Mark Corey leave to the Ramada Plaza Hotel, where Corey is living at the time. In a car in the hotel parking lot, the two of them share a joint. Tarasco seems mostly fine, but Corey takes just one hit of this joint before, well, he immediately throws up. He falls over and starts convulsing violently. He's having a seizure. An ambulance rushes him to the hospital, where he undergoes treatment and several tests. Police question Tarasco about whether or not the weed they smoked was laced with another substance, but Tarasco can't give them an answer or provide a sample. He notes that Corey's seizure was particularly extreme. We'll never know if that weed was laced or not, or what it could have been laced with, but weed is not generally linked to seizures, and in some cases has been used to treat seizures, so it seems unlikely that the weed alone could have caused a seizure of this magnitude, unless it was laced. Also, it is worth noting that Tarasco was actually investigated by Major League Baseball just months earlier, when a woman alleged that, at a downtown nightclub, she was partying with Tony Tarasco and a few other baseball players when she sipped her drink and began to have seizures of her own afterwards. The case was dropped because the woman couldn't remember any details, and Tarasco denied any wrongdoing. I'm not suggesting anything, but I did want to point that out. Anyway, later that same season, relief pitcher Grant Roberts was the subject of more marijuana drama. A Newsday report came out in September 2002 that included a picture of Roberts smoking marijuana. The picture was allegedly from 1998, when Roberts was in the minor leagues, but he was still embarrassed and publicly apologized for the photo. During his apology, he claimed that the photo was released as a result of an attempted extortion. Apparently, a woman contacted Grant Roberts 2 months prior and threatened to leak the photo to the press unless Roberts gave in to her demands, which consisted of an unspecified amount of money. Roberts and his agent actually let the Mets and Major League Baseball know about the incident at the time, and an investigation took place, although nothing came of it. Roberts refused to give in to this woman's demands, and 2 months later, the photo appeared in Newsday. It was a totally bizarre sequence of events. The article also detailed more information about Tarasco, Corey, and other unnamed Mets, and how players would sneak weed into Shea Stadium in peanut butter jars to avoid the drug-sniffing police dogs, or how they would ride in limousines instead of the team bus to smoke weed on the road, and also how they would get advance notice of random drug tests. All of these claims were rebuked by Mets players and GM Steve Phillips, but the Mark Corey seizures and the Grant Roberts extortion situation, those stories are confirmed to be true. 2002 actually saw even more Mets drama. This next story is all about tabloids, gossip, rumors, and Mike Piazza. No one knows for sure where the rumor came from initially. There's an idea that some unnamed former teammate leaked it first, but also, in the summer of 2001, the editor-in-chief of Out magazine, an LGBTQ publication, claimed to have had a homosexual relationship with a pro baseball player from a Major League East Coast franchise. A year later, Mets manager Bobby Valentine was quoted as saying, "Major League Baseball is probably ready for an openly gay player." It was after that Valentine quote that the rumors really exploded into mainstream discourse. The rumors, of course, were all linked to one Mike Piazza, and they evolved. It eventually circulated that Piazza was in a relationship with openly gay ABC weatherman Sam Champion. On this early Out of the Park baseball forum, someone claimed that Piazza and Champion were looking at houses together in Alpine, New Jersey. Another article claimed the two were actually building a house together on the Jersey Shore. On this Google forum, another netizen said that his friend knew an NYPD officer who claimed that Champion once filed a domestic abuse report against Piazza. Another said that New York City gays had known Piazza was one of them for years. A New York Post article shortly after read that there was a persistent rumor around town that one Mets star who spends a lot of time with pretty models in clubs is actually gay and has started to think about declaring his sexual orientation. Everyone knew they were alluding to Piazza. And for Piazza, this was the final straw. The next day, Tuesday, May 21st, 2002, Mike Piazza holds a press conference at Shea before their game against the Phillies. "I'm not gay. I'm heterosexual." I think it's the first time in history anyone had to alert the media to come out as not gay. Piazza elaborated further and seemed to agree with Bobby Valentine's earlier comments and that he wouldn't have a problem with a gay teammate. Many joked that Piazza's declaration just made him seem more likely to be gay. But anyway, in his mind at least, he had put the rumors to bed. In 2003, though, Scottish band Belle and Sebastian released a song entitled Piazza, New York Catcher. In it, they have a lyric that goes, "San Francisco's calling us, the Giants and Mets will play. Piazza, New York Catcher, are you straight or are you gay?" Forever immortalizing these early 2000s rumors. Regardless, in 2005, Mike Piazza married former Baywatch and The Young and the Restless actress Alicia Richter. They are still married today and have since had 3 children together. In 2013, Piazza released a memoir. In it, he briefly touched on his gay rumors. He writes, "I found it hugely insulting that people believed I'd go so far out of my way, living with playmates, vacationing with actresses, showing up at nightclubs, to act out a lifestyle that would amount to a charade. If I was gay, I'd be gay all the way." At least he can't say he's not an ally. The Mets front office has often been indicted in this series for their litany of poor decisions, both baseball-related and not. Here's another. The Mets hired their former 90s infielder Willie Randolph to be their manager in 2004. Randolph led the team to an NLCS appearance in 2006, but was also the skipper for their collapse in 2007. The Mets got off to a slow start in 2008. They had some injuries going into the season, but by the middle of June, they had started to crawl back. On June 16th, they were 34-35 and had just won 3 out of 4 in Anaheim. In the early hours of June 17th, at about 3 a.m. Eastern, but midnight on the West Coast, in a bizarre turn of events, the Mets fired Willie Randolph. Randolph had long suspected he was on the hot seat due to the team's underperformance. Fans at Shea Stadium chanted, "Fire Willie," during the Mets' most recent homestand. So Randolph actually approached GM Omar Minaya before the team's road trip to LA and told him, "If I'm not the guy to lead this team, don't let me get on this plane." He wanted to rip the Band-Aid off, but Omar Minaya wouldn't do it. He said that everything was fine and the team would carry on. After their win on Monday night, Randolph was told to go to Omar Minaya's hotel room. Minaya had flown all the way from New York that day just to deliver the news. Going into it, Randolph said he thought that the meeting was about firing pitching coach Rick Peterson and that he was going to have to defend him. Having just won 3 out of 4 and rapidly approaching 500, and considering what Minaya had just told him a couple days earlier, Randolph thought his job was safe. He was technically right about the Rick Peterson part. The Mets did fire him as well that early morning. But he was shocked at the news that he was also being let go. Despite typical fan overreaction, much of the early hole the Mets found themselves in was due to injury luck. They were very clearly trending upwards, and Randolph had a history of success with this team. They were only 6.5 games behind the first-place Phillies, with a lot more baseball to play. Lots of people were shocked too, just at the manner in which the firing was done. To put Randolph on that plane and fly him out to LA for 4 games just to fire him at midnight after the last game just seemed inconsiderate and rude. But as we'll see, the Mets front office may have had a certain vendetta against Randolph. After the 2008 season, the Mets would not have a winning record for the next 6 years until 2015. Jerry Manuel, Randolph's replacement, was fired after the 2010 season, after 2 straight 4th-place finishes. Not long after Willie Randolph's firing in 2008, fingers were pointed at Mets Vice President of Player Development, Tony Bernazard. Bernazard was hired as Mets VP in 2004, after serving as GM Omar Minaya's assistant. Willie Randolph didn't trust him. Reports came out over the season that Bernazard was an undermining presence, who would turn players, specifically Spanish-speaking players, against their manager on behalf of the front office. He was thought of as sort of a clubhouse spy. It got to a point where Randolph eventually forbade any of his players from talking to Bernazard outside of his supervision. It was Bernazard who delivered the message to Randolph to go see Omar Minaya, who would fire him that night. But Bernazard was not free from criticism. He had a couple of his own crazy moments during his Mets tenure that, after Randolph's firing, would actually lead to his firing as well. Let me take you through them. In late June or early July 2009, internal reports came up that some members of the Binghamton Mets, the Mets AA team, were underage drinking. That, combined with a recent 1-6 homestand, led to some members of the player development team becoming very upset. Like Tony Bernazard. As VP of Player Development, Bernazard spent a lot of time around the Mets minor league system, and he was livid at this recent stretch and news about the team. So livid, in fact, that he came into the Binghamton clubhouse one day and went on a completely psychotic tirade, lambasting the team. He singled out infielder Jose Coronado as a primary target, but also, at one point, ripped off his shirt and threatened to literally fight the entire Binghamton roster. After the report of that incident came out, another came shortly after, that Bernazard had also got into a heated exchange with Mets all-star closer Francisco Rodriguez after the Binghamton tirade. The back-to-back reports were ultimately too much for Mets upper management to handle. On July 27th, the Mets announced that they had fired Bernazard in a press conference. But of course, with the Mets and all, this was not a standard run-of-the-mill press conference. In a shocking move, Omar Minaya publicly blamed Daily News reporter Adam Rubin, who had broken both stories about Bernazard, and claimed that Rubin was unfairly targeting Bernazard because he wanted to see him fired so that Rubin would have a shot at getting on the Mets player development team. He alleged that Rubin had come to Minaya and the Wilpons several times before, asking if there was availability in that department. During the press conference, Rubin grabbed the mic and called these allegations despicable. Minaya later issued an apology, but only for handling the situation publicly. He said he still stood by what he said about Rubin. These late 2000s Mets were a disaster. Let's go to 2010. Francisco Rodriguez, better known as K-Rod, the closer who got into a fight with Bernazard after the Binghamton thing, also had quite the temper. This year, he had also got into a fight with the Mets bullpen coach Randy Neiman. It was in August 2010, though, where K-Rod's temper really got him into trouble. It's August 11th, and the Mets just lost to the Colorado Rockies 6-2. Rodriguez retreats to the clubhouse and eventually the family lounge. Suddenly, an altercation occurs. There's commotion. Security guards come running. K-Rod's father-in-law, Carlos Pena, is seen with major swelling above his right eyebrow. K-Rod is seen storming off. He tells reporters to mind their own fucking business. Police arrive and promptly arrest Francisco Rodriguez. He is charged with third-degree assault. He had punched Pena directly in the face, and Pena had to be taken to the hospital on a stretcher. You ever seen a fan get escorted out of the stadium by police? It's not a common sight, so maybe you've only heard about something like that. Maybe they're throwing shit out on the field, or maybe they hopped the fence and started streaking, or maybe they're just generally being reckless and unruly. Regardless, they're most likely being escorted to a holding cell in the stadium. This is a very common practice. At larger stadiums, baseball, football, or even other venues, they have holding cells at the stadium where police can take detainees until they are transferred somewhere else. The police took Francisco Rodriguez, a player for the New York Mets, and kept him in the Citi Field holding cell overnight. Carlos Pena suffered from frontal lobe hematoma, as well as abrasions and contusions. Rodriguez avoided jail time with a plea deal. He was traded to Milwaukee midway through 2011. Charlie Samuels began his career with the Mets in 1976. He wasn't a baseball player. I don't mean to say that he began his career playing for the Mets. He was a Mets staffer. In 1983, he was promoted to team equipment manager, and sometime after that, he was promoted to clubhouse manager and traveling secretary. Samuels was very popular with the players. Dwight Gooden came to his wedding. He let Francisco Rodriguez stay at his house after that incident with his father-in-law we just talked about. I actually mentioned Charlie Samuels briefly last episode. He was the equipment manager who stayed up all night to bail out Tuffle, Darling, Ojeda, and Aguilera after the Cooters bar fight incident. He worked as the Mets clubhouse manager for 27 seasons until November 2010, when he was fired. MLB was already investigating Samuels since the year before. They received tips that he was gambling with illegal bookies and betting on Mets games. Sports betting is legal in New York now, but that's only as of 2022. Even still, it's generally against club policy to allow staffers to bet on games. Apparently, Samuels confessed to authorities that he not only bet on baseball, but comped up to $400 in Mets tickets to his mobbed-up bookies. That's all it took for the Mets to fire him, but more would come out later. Even at the time, MLB suggested that the Mets should audit their financial records, and authorities had already suspected that Samuels had been stealing team memorabilia from the clubhouse. A few months later, in May 2011, Charlie Samuels was arrested. It had come out that Samuels had amassed a massive collection of stolen Mets memorabilia that he gathered over the years from the Mets clubhouse. He had 507 jerseys, signed and unsigned, as well as 304 hats, 828 bats, 22 helmets, 10 equipment bags, and even more ill-gotten swag, which Queens District Attorney Richard Brown said was valued altogether at $2.3 million. This was essentially Samuels' retirement plan. As the traveling secretary, Samuels was also accused of padding Mets expenses and skimming the excess for himself, and also failing to report over $200,000 in dues and gratuities on his taxes. Samuels' lawyer claimed that the memorabilia was not stolen, but rather given to him, and he was able to collect them as a perk of his job. If he was to be convicted of first-degree possession of stolen property, he could have faced 8 to 25 years in prison. He wasn't. He got 5 years probation and was ordered to make over $50,000 in payments to the DA's office to cover the cost of the investigation. He was also ordered to make monthly payments to the Mets over the course of his probation. Furthermore, he was banned from all Mets facilities, including the spring training complex in Port St. Lucie. In episode 4, I hinted at some stories involving former Mets pitcher Chris Benson, who was acquired by the team at the 2004 trade deadline. Well, now is the time. This is the last Mets controversy I'm going to discuss this episode. It is, in my opinion, one of the most layered, extensive, bizarre Mets or Mets-adjacent stories that has ever happened, which is why I saved it for last. Enjoy. Chris Benson only played for the Mets for a year and a half. In his lone full season with the Mets, he pitched to a 4.13 ERA with 95 strikeouts and 174 and a third innings pitched. His ERA plus was exactly 100, meaning he was a perfectly league average pitcher. He was traded to Baltimore in the offseason between 2005 and 2006, but the soft-spoken, league average Chris Benson wasn't really the problem for the Mets. The problem was Anna Benson, Chris's wife. Anna Benson was anything but league average. Anna Benson is a nut job. She has always been a nut job. She was a nut job before the Mets, she was a nut job during Chris's Mets tenure, and she was a nut job long after the Mets. She is also a literal criminal on multiple counts, as we will get to. But let's start with the Mets stuff. Anna Benson wasn't a stranger to being in the headlines. While Chris was with the Pittsburgh Pirates, they both made the news when they were featured in the May 2001 Penthouse magazine. They both posed topless and shared intimate details about their sex life. Not typical stuff for a Major League Baseball player, but that would probably end up being the tamest of the Anna Benson stories over the course of this saga. After Chris's first half season with the Mets in 2004, Anna Benson posed for FHM magazine, which dubbed her baseball's hottest wife. So she was already in the public spotlight when in December of that year, she appeared on the Howard Stern show. During their interview, Anna claimed that if she ever caught Chris cheating on her, she would get her revenge by sleeping with the entire Mets roster.
What would you do?
I told him, cheat on me all you want. If you get caught, I'm going to screw everybody on your entire team.
Oh, nice.
Coaches,
Good news for
hold
Mike
on.
Piazza. You're saying
players.
Mike Piazza just did a backflip. Hello.
It was a funny comment, made in jest, but Anna Benson's public comments only got worse and worse. A Daily News article in November 2004, written by Adam Rubin, quickly became a PR nightmare for the Mets. Rubin interviewed Anna Benson over the phone, and during this interview, she made not one, but several controversial statements. When that article came out, the Mets had recently acquired Carlos Delgado from the Marlins. Benson had opinions on that. She publicly disapproved of the trade and said that Delgado had turned his back on America by refusing to come out of the dugout for renditions of God Bless America during the 2004 season, as a protest to the US involvement in Iraq post 9/11. She continued, essentially saying that it was unfair that the Mets seemed to have more of an issue with her potentially posing nude for Playboy than they did for Delgado sitting for God Bless America, adding that Playboy was all-American and Delgado was not. She also claimed that GM Omar Minaya was attempting to create an all-Latin team. In regards to rumors that the Mets were possibly going to trade Chris Benson, she continued to blast Mets officials. Chris had signed a 3-year, $22.5 million contract deal at the end of the 2004 season. In an article around that time, Anna told the media that he was donating $1 million a year to 9/11 related charities. Now, however. She said she wanted their donation money back. During the interview, Adam Rubin had asked if maybe Anna Benson wanted to walk back any of her more controversial statements, but she said it was all the truth. Chris Benson even asked Rubin to leave out the all-Latino team line, which in the original article he did. Rubin left that out, as well as the 9/11 charity statement. But then, it's December 2005. The Mets are hosting a charity Christmas party. It's an event they do every year, and each year, a new player dresses up as Santa Claus and gives out toys to children. Chris Benson is the Santa Claus this year. But as you know, Santa Claus is incomplete without his one and only Mrs. Claus. And here she comes. Anna Benson arrives shortly behind Chris, wearing a Mrs. Claus outfit all right, if you can call it that. It's a rather revealing, low-cut dress. And once again, just like that, she's in the headlines. This is a charity event for elementary school-aged children, and her outfit was generally thought to be completely inappropriate. Benson made more comments to the media that day. She not only refused to apologize for her outfit, but she also blasted Adam Rubin and the Daily News for the article he had written about their interview. She claimed that all her quotes were taken completely out of context and said that we shouldn't believe everything we read in the papers. In response to that, Daily News reporter Philip Bondi wrote an article, not only about the Mrs. Claus debacle, but also revealing the parts of the previous interview that Rubin had omitted, about the all-Latin team and the 9/11 donations. Ultimately, this series of events was the final straw for the Mets front office. They traded Chris Benson to the Baltimore Orioles a month later. The Mets denied it had anything to do with Anna Benson. Omar Minaya merely said that they had made a baseball move. But Chris and Anna, as well as Adam Rubin, all publicly suspected that it had everything to do with Anna's antics. But that's not where it ends. That's only the beginning. The rest of this story, admittedly, doesn't have much to do with the Mets, but it's impossible to talk about Chris and Anna Benson without mentioning this stuff. Chris Benson's career tailed off after his 2006 season with the Orioles. He missed all of 2007 with a torn rotator cuff and then spent a lot of time in the minors for a few different teams. But he could not escape the controversies of his wife. In 2006, Anna filed for divorce amidst allegations of Chris cheating on her, but a week later they reconciled and got back together. Shortly after that, they even had another child together. Things with the Bensons were quiet after that for a while. Until 2012. Early that year, Anna discovered that Chris Benson had an affair with one of her best friends. In response to this, Chris Benson served her with divorce papers. The divorce remained unfinalized for over a year, but then... It's early July 2013. Anna Benson is arrested at Chris Benson's home in Smyrna, Georgia. Not only had she broken into his house, but she was also wearing a bulletproof vest and was armed with a handgun, a knife, a hatchet, a taser, a baton, and a bandolier full of extra ammunition. She brandished her gun in front of Chris, demanded money from him, and threatened his life. She essentially held him hostage in his own home. Trying to defuse the situation, Chris told Anna that he would go find a lighter for her so that she could have a cigarette. He managed to escape to the basement, where he was able to call the police. Anna Benson was arrested, and Chris was given an emergency restraining order against her, as well as full custody of their 3 children. Anna lost all visitation rights and was eventually sentenced to 15 years of probation. In 2016, Anna Benson violated her probation by trespassing into someone's home in Mableton, Georgia, and stealing their mail. While in jail, she was supposed to appear at a probation revocation hearing, but obviously could not show up. That's the last anyone's really heard of her. Somehow, though, that's not even the craziest Anna Benson story. Anna Benson was born on February 12th, 1976, in Mableton, Georgia. After her sophomore year of high school, she dropped out and became a stripper. By the time she was 17 years old, she was married to a man named John Warren, and the two of them had a child. Anna Benson, or I should say Anna Warren at the time, and her husband's marriage didn't last long, just 6 years. They officially divorced in 1999, but were actually separated for longer than that. Anna Warren had a different boyfriend in 1996, named Paul DeJong. Anyway, what I'm getting at here is that, well, in 1996, Anna and Paul were living in Anna's apartment in Knoxville, Tennessee, and one day, after some commotion, their neighbors called the police on them. After the police entered Anna's apartment, they discovered the dead body of 18-year-old Michael Evans. Evans had been shot twice in the back of the head, right in front of their front door. Additionally, Anna's apartment was completely covered in satanic and anti-police graffiti. 666s, of course, but also 187s, the California Penal Code for murder of a police officer, as well as "The only good pig is a dead pig." Anna and Paul were nowhere to be found. They had apparently fled the scene in a stolen vehicle. A nationwide manhunt ensued for 7 months after that. Anna and Paul were even featured on America's Most Wanted.
18-year-old Michael Evans had his whole life ahead of him. He just started college and was starting to be a journalist. When he was murdered, his father, Michael Sr., was devastated. But he didn't give in to his grief. He asked America's Most Wanted to join his fight. Knoxville, Tennessee, 1995. Paul DeJong and Anna Warren were new in town.
What do you do for me?
Anything you want.
I can live with that.
20-year-old Warren was from Georgia and made her living as a topless dancer. Lise DeJong, also 20, spent most of his time as a small-time thief. The couple's apartment became a crash pad for a number of local teens. One of them was 18-year-old Mike Evans.
Anna was caught 5 months into the search on June 18th in Portland, Oregon, and Paul was caught in August in Atlanta. Both were charged with first-degree murder. Those charges didn't stick, of course. Despite the gruesome scene, literally in Anna's apartment, as well as witness testimonies from their neighbors, there was not enough evidence to convict Anna of anything. Neighbors had overheard an argument in Anna's apartment between her and Paul, in which Anna clearly told Paul to get rid of him in reference to Michael Evans. Evans was still alive at this time. Paul took this statement to mean kill him, and so he did. The ambiguity of the statement, however, is what got Anna off scot-free. Her charges were dropped from murder to accessory to murder to then nothing. Paul, however, was convicted of first-degree murder. On an appeal, it was lowered to second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 21 years in prison, where he eventually died. Anna's accessory charges were dismissed in May 1998. Later that year, while dancing at the Mardi Gras, a strip club in Atlanta, she met a certain minor league baseball pitcher, and the two of them hit it off. Chris and Anna Benson were married a year later in 1999. And well, you know what happened next. We last left off with the September 2024 Mets about to take on the first-place Philadelphia Phillies in a 4-game set. The first 2 games of this series are incredibly high-scoring. 4 Mets went yard in Game 1 in a 10-6 win, but the Phillies responded emphatically with a 12-2 win of their own. That win, on September 20th, clinches a playoff berth for the Phillies. There's a team, though, that is not our beloved Metsies, that is on the verge of history this season. A team we have not discussed until this point. As of September 21st, 2024, the Chicago White Sox have 119 losses with 7 more games to play. To go in-depth on the White Sox this season would require its own 7-part series, so we're not going to do that. But they have been astonishingly bad, essentially fielding the talent of a AAA team day in and day out. The White Sox, I think, are perhaps the most comparable franchise in baseball to the Mets, in terms of sheer misery for their fans. They have one more World Series title than the Mets do, but they've also been around for over 60 years longer than the Mets have. Since their last title in 2005, they haven't won a single playoff series. That's 19 years. It seems inevitable that this team is not just going to tie, but break the record for losingest team in baseball history that belonged to the Mets for over 50 years. And in this same year, against all odds, the Mets are playing not just meaningful September baseball, but fighting for their lives for a playoff spot. Another day goes by. The Mets beat Philly again. The White Sox lose to the Padres. 120 losses. The Mets are now 87-69, with 6 games left to play in the regular season. They are in possession of the second wildcard spot, tied with Arizona, but ahead of them because they won the season series, and they're 2 games ahead of the Atlanta Braves. The Padres are 1 win away from clinching the first wildcard spot, so that's pretty much out of the question here. You got 3 teams competing for the last 2 spots. And for the next 3 games, the Mets are in Atlanta. The magic number in relation to the Braves is 5, but that number drops to 4 if the Mets win this series against the Braves, because they will then have won the season series and thus hold the tiebreaker. So what we need is a combination of 5 Mets wins and Braves losses. But if the Mets win 2 out of 3 in Atlanta, they can clinch a wildcard berth in Truist Park. How poetic would that be? 2 years ago, the Mets waltzed into Atlanta in a very similar situation and got their asses kicked. The history between the Mets and the Braves is extraordinarily one-sided. It would be so poetic. But I've never known the Mets to be poets. After the Braves series, the Mets play the Milwaukee Brewers, who have had their number all season long. The Braves play the Kansas City Royals, who are close to clinching a wildcard spot of their own. The Diamondbacks are playing the San Francisco Giants, who are well out of playoff contention. And then the Padres, who will likely have already clinched their wildcard berth by then. Monday, September 23rd. Off day for the Mets and Braves. The Diamondbacks lose their first game against San Francisco 6-3. Down in Miami, the National Hurricane Center warns that Tropical System Invest 97L, I don't know why they named it that, has the potential to develop into a tropical cyclone within the next 2 days. Tuesday, September 24th. Invest 97L has been classified as a tropical cyclone. Overnight, heavy rainfall floods Cuba. The storm is anticipated to progress north through the Gulf of Mexico. The Mets and Braves play the first of their 3-game slate. It's the Braves' Spencer Schwellenbach versus the Mets' Luis Severino. In the bottom of the 3rd, the Mets give up 3 runs to timely RBI hits from Michael Harris II, Ozzie Albies, and Ramon Laureano. Then another 2 runs in the 4th and 5th off homers from Harris and Marcelo Zuna. Schwellenbach shoves for 7 straight innings, only allowing a solo shot to Mark Vientos. The Mets lose 5-1. Atlanta is now just 1 game back. The Mets are not poets. Over in Phoenix, the Diamondbacks lose their 2nd straight to the Giants and 3rd straight game overall, 0 to a whopping 11. The Chicago White Sox win their first game against the Angels and maintain their 120 losses. But now, the question remains, With the tropical storm, now dubbed Hurricane Helene, coming up north and heavy rainfall expected in Atlanta on Wednesday and Thursday, are these two teams going to be able to play their games? MLB refuses to make a decision until tomorrow. Wednesday, September 25th. Mets-Braves is scheduled for 7 p.m. After intense rain in Atlanta all day, at 5:21 p.m., the Braves announced that this game, in addition to Thursday's game, will be rescheduled to a doubleheader on September 30th. September 30th is, or was, I should say, an off day for all 30 MLB teams. The wildcard series is set to begin on October 1st. Of course, the wildcard berths could be set in stone before the 30th, which would make those games unnecessary, but we're gonna have to wait and see. The Diamondbacks finally win against the Giants 8-2. The White Sox win against the Angels again. Thursday, September 26th. The Mets are headed to Milwaukee for their weekend series. The Royals are on their way to Atlanta, and the Padres are going to Phoenix. The Chicago White Sox win their third straight and sweep the Angels. Friday, September 27th. The Padres beat the Diamondbacks 5-3 and clinch the top NL wildcard spot. Arizona has lost 4 of their last 5 games. The rain in Atlanta has subsided, and they're all set to play the Royals. The Braves beat them handily 3-0. Despite their loss tonight, another loss by the Minnesota Twins allows the Royals to clinch a wildcard berth of their own. The Mets are in Milwaukee. Sean Manaea versus Joe Ross. This is where the season began, and this is potentially where it can end. In the first inning, Manaea gives up a single to Bryce Terang, who then steals second base. He strikes out Frelick. Churio flies out to right. Terang steals third, and William Contreras walks. Then Willy Adames walks. And now, the bases are loaded, and perennial Mets villain Rhys Hoskins is at the plate. Do you remember the first episode from the very first game of the season when the Mets and Brewers went at each other because of a questionable slide into second by Hoskins? The Mets are not poets.
2-2 coming. And a smack to deep left field. Back goes Nimmo on the warning track. Looks up, and it's out of here. A grand slam for Rhys Hoskins.
They lose 8-4. Later that night, the Detroit Tigers win and clinch an American League wildcard spot. They just beat the Chicago White Sox for their 121st loss, a modern era record. It's oddly bittersweet. A record for most losses in a season is theoretically a record that nobody wants. But at the same time, that was our record. Just about as often as fans of good teams argue which of their teams is better, fans of bad teams do the opposite. We engage in a sort of sad, pathetic dick measuring contest of whose fan base has endured more misery. And for over 60 years, the modern era losses record was ours. Our proof that we, as Mets fans, had endured the worst baseball season in modern history. I mean, I myself didn't really endure that, and hell, my dad wasn't even old enough to endure that, but symbolically, I think that meant something to us as Mets fans. And now, for better or for worse, it's no longer ours. Saturday, September 28th, the Braves beat the Royals again, and the Mets are shut out by the Brewers. But miraculously, the Diamondbacks lose again, and the Mets maintain their wildcard positioning. I think maybe, just maybe, the White Sox breaking the record has erased some of the Mets' bad juju. Because, well, Sunday, September 29th, the Braves lose, the Diamondbacks win, and the Mets, for the first time in 2024, finally beat the Milwaukee Brewers 5-0. The Mets and Braves are now tied with 2 to play against each other. The Diamondbacks are a half game behind both of them, but have finished their season. For the Diamondbacks to make the playoffs, either the Mets or the Braves would have to sweep both games of the doubleheader. For the Mets and Braves to make the playoffs, they just have to split these next 2 games. The Diamondbacks are in a very tough position right now. It stands to reason that whoever wins Game 1 tomorrow is going to completely phone it in Game 2 so as to not waste any more pitching or risk injuries to important players before the wildcard round starts. But even with that in mind, Game 1 tomorrow is going to be an absolute dogfight because no one wants to play Game 162 with their season on the line, regardless of who the competition is. If the Mets lose Game 1, do you really expect the Braves to just roll over with the opportunity to end the Mets season? Even though this scenario favors the Mets over the Diamondbacks, you can't put anything past them. It would be so like this franchise to have this magical season, this insane run for the past 4 months, just to fizzle out in the last 2 weeks and miss the playoffs. Even more fitting for it to happen in Atlanta. The Mets are not poets. Monday, September 30th, Game 1. It all comes down to this. The Mets are starting Tylor Megill. The Braves, once again, Spencer Schwellenbach. 1:15 p.m. first pitch. I'm listening to this shit on the radio driving home from my parents' house. The game is scoreless through the first 2 innings. Mets hitters look helpless against Schwellenbach once again, but Megill is holding his own. He allows 2 infield singles in the second, but strikes out Gio Urshela and Orlando Arcia to get out of the jam. The Mets seem to have something going in the top of the third. Tyrone Taylor scrapes out an infield hit of his own and then steals second. They've got a man in scoring position with Francisco Alvarez at the plate. Alvarez grounds out to short, but this allows Taylor to progress to third. Unfortunately, it's all for naught, as back-to-back groundouts from Bader and Lindor keep the Mets scoreless. The inning goes much better for the Braves. Michael Harris II works a 7-pitch at-bat and is rewarded with a base hit to center. Ozzie Albies swings through a cutter. He watches another one outside for a ball, and then another one for a strike. He fouls back a 4-seamer. And then, on the 5th pitch of the at-bat, Megill hangs him an 83-mile-an-hour slider right down the middle.
And the breaking ball hit deep to left. Back goes Nimmo, back to the warning track, and it's out of here. Ozzie Albies goes deep, right on right.
2-0. The Mets have to contend with another couple of base hits and a passed ball to put 2 men in scoring position before Megill finally works his way out of the inning. The 4th is scoreless for both teams. Spencer Schwellenbach is only at 45 pitches. If the Mets want to have a chance at winning this game, at the very least, they need to work some better at-bats. Whether or not they score, they need to chase Schwellenbach out of this game. The 5th looks a little better for the Mets. A 6-pitch at-bat from Alonso ends in a base hit, as does a 5-pitch at-bat from JD Martinez. Tyrone Taylor strikes out, but does so on 5 pitches. Alvarez hits a first-pitch slider into the ground right back to Schwellenbach, but advances both runners. Now, with 2 outs and both runners in scoring position, Harrison Bader is up. Andy Weakley grounds out to second. The Braves don't get anything going in the bottom of the 5th either, but after the Mets go down in order on just 7 pitches in the top of the 6th, the Braves get a Ramon Laureano solo shot in the bottom of the frame to go up 3-0. After Megill then gives up a single to Gio Urshela, the Braves have successfully chased him out of the game. Huascar Brazoban manages to escape the inning without further damage. Schwellenbach gets through another quick inning in the top of the 7th. He's now pitched 7 shutty on 83 pitches. This has all the makings of a complete game shutout if the Mets aren't able to answer. Fortunately for the Mets, Adam Ottavino is able to keep the score the same through the bottom of the frame. Schwellenbach is back for the 8th. Tyrone Taylor is up. First pitch slider is taken for a ball. The next pitch is a cutter, taken for strike 1. Slider, check swing, he went around. Strike 2. Another ball on a curve below the zone. 2-2. Cutter, fouled down the third base line. Slider, fouled back. Cutter, up and in, ball 3, it's 3-2. Another cutter, fouled down the right field line, out of play. Another cutter, fouled down the third base line. Curveball, down and in, line drive down the third base line, just foul, barely. Still 3-2. On the 11th pitch of the at-bat, a slider, 89 miles an hour, hanging right down the middle. Tyrone Taylor smacks it into the left center field gap for a leadoff double. Schwellenbach is finally taken out of the game. Man on second, no outs. Joe Jimenez is in for the Braves. He's been one of their best relievers all year. He fires a first pitch slider to Alvarez for strike one looking. He comes back with another one.
It's pulled down to third and past Schwellenbach.
It's a double to left. Taylor comes around to score easily. The Mets cut into the lead 3-1. Starling Marte pinch hits for Bader. On another slider, he gets a base hit to left. Alvarez reaches third. There's still no outs. Lindor is up. Lindor looks at a four-seamer for a ball, then swings through another one for a strike. 1-1. Another fastball, nearly off the plate, but Lindor gets it and puts it into center field for a base hit. Alvarez scores. 3-2 Braves. Joe Jimenez is taken out of the game. With their season potentially on the line, in comes Braves closer, Raisel Iglesias. Another Iglesias is at the plate, Jose Iglesias. And oh my God, would you believe it, he keeps the Mets rally going with a base hit of his own to score Marte. Lindor goes first to third, and the Mets have tied this ballgame up 3-3. Mark Vientos is now at the plate and delivers the Braves their first out of the inning, but not before sac flying in Lindor to give the Mets a 4-3 lead. Up comes Brandon Nimmo. Four-seamer low and inside, ball one. Another one, ball two. Now up in the zone. Nimmo swings through it. 2-1 count. Four-seamer again. Middle.
And Nimmo clocks one to deep.
Nimmo caps off the inning with a two-run shot to right. 6-3 Mets.
Brandon Nimmo!
Aaron Bummer comes in for Iglesias and gets the final two outs. But the damage is done. The Braves will have two opportunities to answer back. And it looks like that's just what they'll do. Bottom of the eighth now. Phil Maton is in. He immediately hits Eli White with an 87-mile-an-hour sinker, and then gives up a single to Travis d'Arnaud. White goes first to third. The Mets aren't looking to play games here. Maton is out of the game, and in comes Edwin Diaz. He gets Urshela for the second out of the inning, but former Mets top prospect Jared Kelenic slaps an infield hit to score Eli White from third. Whit Merrifield pinch runs for Kelenic and steals second. Diaz walks Harris. Bases loaded, 2 outs. Ozzie Albies at the plate. Diaz falls behind 3-1 and throws a fastball. Albies hits it to the left field wall for a bases clearing double. Braves 7, Mets 6. It's a nightmare. Diaz strikes out Ozuna to end the inning. The Mets have one last shot. Pierce Johnson is in to close the game out for the Braves. He gets Alvarez to pop out before allowing a single to Starling Marte. Francisco Lindor is up. It's a first pitch curveball, 86 miles an hour, right down the middle.
Swinging a high fly ball, well hit right center. Harris going back. It's on the way. It is gone. Into the Braves bullpen in right center field. Francisco Lindor has an MVP moment, whether he wins one or not. He has just put the Mets back on top. 8-7, a 2-run home run. His 33rd of the year. He's not only hugged by Marte lifts Lindor off of his feet. This is an unbelievable baseball game. The Mets have taken an 8-7 lead here in the 9th inning.
Mets 8, Braves 7. I was driving on the Jackie Robinson Parkway while listening to Howie Rose make that call. I nearly crashed the car. Diaz gets through the bottom of the 9th unscathed, and the 2024 Mets have clinched a National League wildcard berth. The Diamondbacks never had a chance. Seriously, the way the Mets played Game 2 against the Braves, you'd almost think that there was collusion of some sort, that these two teams plotted this outcome all along. I mean, obviously the back and forth nature of Game 1 kinda goes against that, but still. The Mets started 10.00 ERA haver Joey Lucchesi in an effort to rest their pitching staff for the wildcard series, set to start the next day. they also rested Vientos and Lindor in favor of Luis Angel Acuna and Olympic figure skater Eddie Alvarez. Luis Torrens is in for Francisco Alvarez, but that's standard for catchers in Game 2 of a doubleheader. The Braves were set to start likely Cy Young winner Chris Sale, but he was scratched last minute due to a nagging back injury. They elected for a bullpen game instead. It didn't matter. The Mets put up at-bats like they straight up did not give a fuck to be there, like they couldn't wait to go pop champagne in the clubhouse. They struck out 11 times against Grant Holmes and the rest of the Braves bullpen, and were ultimately shut out 3-0. Lucchesi did an exceptional job at eating up 6 innings to preserve the Mets pen. Finally, they can go pop champagne in the clubhouse. Some players on both teams even celebrated on the field together. This is the most harmonious I've ever seen the Mets and Braves. And so, just like that, the 2024 Mets, who are at one point in 4th place and 11 games under 500, who started the season 0-5, and by the end of May looked completely lifeless, who made it seem like this season really was going to be a bridge year to compete in 2025, who then rallied around a purple fast food mascot and their Latin pop star second baseman to become the best team in baseball since June, are now playing postseason baseball. Are the Mets poets?